Hey, welcome to Discovering Exodus. This is day 23, Exodus 23. I'm Kristen Tschida, and I am just going to share today, and all these videos are about 10 minutes long. If you want the handouts for each day, for each chapter, you can find those on my website, kristentschida.com. There's a resources tab, and then under that tab, you will see devotionals. Click on that. And on that page, you will find every little devotional handout for each of the chapters. So today we are in Exodus 23, and this is really the continuation of the law. We started Exodus 20. Moses had been up on the mountain. God gave him the 10 Commandments. The law was laid out. And so we saw the 10 Commandments in chapter 20. And then really what we see in 21, 22, and now 23 is the 10 Commandments are like the big overview. And then we've got a few chapters that give some specifics of what it looks like to be a people that belong to God. What does it look like? How do we relate to Him? How do we relate to others? So throughout the book of Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, you'll see the law retold. You'll see the law pulled, like just really kind of pulled apart, so that if you read those books, don't get bogged down by that, because it was what God was establishing something new with a new people. And this was radical living. And no culture had lived the way that God was calling His people to live. And remember, Exodus 19, they meet God on the mountain, and God calls them, that He calls them His treasured possession. And He says they are a chosen people. They're this priesthood. That was His desire, to have a people that He would dwell with. And the way that their whole way of life would be centered around His presence, centered around who He was, who they were in Him. And so what I want to do today is I'm going to connect this law from the Old Testament into Matthew 5, 6, and 7, which is the Sermon on the Mount. And this is when Jesus came on the scene, when He bursts into the stream of humanity, and He lives for those 30 years kind of in ambiguity and learning and teaching. And then at the age of 30, His ministry unfolds, and He has 3.5 years to choose His people to pour His life into. So where God chose the 12 tribes and He gave them the law and He loved them and He wanted them to be His people, we see Jesus choosing 12 disciples, and He's going to pour everything into them, that this kingdom of heaven would then be transferred throughout the earth, through every generation. And we're living in it today. So what I want to do is I want to read Matthew 5. I'm going to read the first few verses focused on the Beatitudes. So that's really what I'm going to focus on. And then I'll connect those with the Old Testament law. If you have your Bibles, follow along. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, He went up on a mountainside and He sat down. His disciples came to Him and He began to teach them. Before we even get started, what we see here is kind of an echo of what Moses did with the Old Testament law, Old Covenant law. Is Moses went up the mountain, received the law, came back down the mountain, and gave the law to the people. Here, Jesus ascends the mountain, and He comes down a little way, and now He's in like the plateau of the mountain. So He's gone up, and now He's coming down, and He is going to share, and not only just to the 12 disciples, this is to all who were following Him. And here's what He said. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is the introduction, the very first message that Jesus gives. And we know through the rest of Matthew 5, Matthew 6, and Matthew 7, that's the culmination of the message of the Sermon on the Mount, the very first message. And really what Jesus is introducing is, here's a way to relate to God. Here's a way to relate to one another. And throughout it, you'll hear him say, Moses said this, but I say this. Moses said this, but I say this. And if you remember several chapters back, what we looked at was that love fulfills the law. And so in the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, Jesus lays out, if you want to be rightly related to me, this is the way that you are going to live. And just as God had laid that out with the Old Testament covenant, the Old Covenant people, if you love me, if you worship me, this is the way that you will live. This is what life will look like. God's looking for a people who will be his kingdom people. So to recognize we're not residents on earth, I may live in Missouri, but I'm not a full-blown resident of Missouri. I'm here on a mission. My residency is in the kingdom of heaven. Your residency is in the kingdom of heaven. You're a chosen one. You are a chosen people. We are together collectively a holy nation, but you are holy and you are his treasured possession. And this is what Jesus speaks us. 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10 tells us Jesus is calling us. First of all, he calls us living stones, and we are to operate as though we live in a different place. And we're here on earth for an assignment, for a mission from God. And when we think about the kingdom, and I think about just even Old Covenant law and the New Covenant law, what in the Old Testament, what Moses was giving was, here's the blueprint of what it looks like to live in the kingdom. What Jesus is saying, here's the blueprint for what it looks like to live in the kingdom. If you have not read Matthew 5, Matthew 6, Matthew 7, I just really want to encourage you. We could spend years, you could spend all of your Christian life just meditating through Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and you would be able to grasp what it is that God is asking of us, what it means to walk in obedience, what it means, what the blueprint is. And remember, a blueprint, when we built our house, when we built our house in Omaha, we had blueprints for what the room dimensions were going to look like, what the elevation of the outside of the house. All that was needed by the architect was in that blueprint, so that when the construction workers came in, they knew what the dimensions were for everything, what the walls were going to look like. And that is so when we are not sure, what does it look like? What is the blueprint of the kingdom? For us, New Covenant believers, we go to Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And just as the 10 Commandments, I feel like so many of those laws we're getting the overview in the 10 Commandments. And then as the law is kind of written out, the social laws, the health laws, the how to relate to God, how to worship, all of that is kind of it's the fine print of the overview. And it's like there was an outline, and here's all the little bullet points that fill in the outline. It's the same thing with the New Covenant. Jesus gives us the Sermon on the Mount, and then everything within the New Testament is pointing to what Jesus spoke about in the New Covenant. And here's something for us to know, that when we really know who we are, when we really know where we come from, when we know where we're going back to, when we understand the reality that we are kingdom people, we will live differently. We will live on the outside differently, but it all happens here. This is all about our inner world. Jesus is concerned about the heart. God in the Old Covenant was concerned about the heart. It's all about the heart. Jesus isn't looking for behavior modification. God wasn't looking for behavior modification, just act this way out of duty, out of obligation. He's looking for lovers. Jesus is looking for lovers, those who will obey him because they love him, those who will walk this very radical life because they love him and they recognize that he alone is worthy. God was saying the same thing to the in that Old Testament covenant, that he was reminding them, I'm the worthy one. Look at who I am, how much I love you, how much I've done everything for you. And this is what I ask of you, that you would give me your hearts wholly. And we're seeing the same thing in the New Testament. Jesus laid down his life for us. We've been bought with a price. We've been bought by the righteous one. And so we get to step right in to this place of righteous living. We understand it's a process. We know that it doesn't happen overnight, but we're in the business of having our minds completely transformed. So we ask God, transform my inner world so that my outer world will be transformed. And the radical living that God called the Israelites to is the same thing Jesus is calling us to, a radical life. I've written out just kind of a few things when I'm looking at the Beatitudes of what I feel like Jesus, it's truly the upside down kingdom. And I'm just going to read to you what I've written in my journal here. Really, the Beatitudes, this living for the kingdom is: the last is first, giving is receiving, dying is living, losing is finding, the least is the greatest, poor is rich, weakness is strength, serving is ruling. It makes no sense to the flesh. It makes no sense in this culture, in the kingdom of this world, the kingdom even of America. But it's such an opposite kingdom. And so we can't do any of it by ourselves. We can't do it out of our flesh. There's the invitation. We need to ask Holy Spirit, would you come and would you fill me and would you lead me into truth? Would you train me? Would you transform me so that our thought life, our prayer life, that our hearts become wholly his, and from that place we will fulfill the law, because the law is fulfilled when we love, that we love God and we love others. It's the same thing that God was saying in the Old Testament. It looks different because it was a different kind of a culture that was all just in that day and age, in that time period. But for us, we have a law too, that we are to obediently follow because of love. All right, that's it for Exodus 23. I will see you tomorrow. In Exodus 24, we are almost to the tabernacle. So get ready. Those are my favorite chapters. I will see you tomorrow.